Caleb's heart woke before the sun, his body stiff from a night spent half awake, listening to the wind carry the last whispers of fire across the valley. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, his clothes, his hair, even the air itself. When he pushed open the cabin door, the sky was pale gray, the kind of quiet morning that followed disaster. The wildfire that had raged through the hills the night before was gone now, leaving behind scorched earth, blackened mesquite trees, and fence posts burned down to crooked stumps. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching over ash, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle by the door. The cattle were alive, huddled together near what remained of the corral, their sides streaked with soot. Caleb let out a slow breath of relief. He had lost land, fencing, and weeks of work, but not his livelihood and not his life. Then he saw her. She stood a short distance away, near the water trough, wrapped in a dark wool blanket. She did not move when he froze, did not reach for a weapon or turn away. She simply watched him, her posture straight despite the exhaustion written on her face. Her long black hair was braided neatly down her back, threaded with small turquoise beads that caught the weak morning light. Her eyes, dark, steady, unafraid, met his without hesitation. Apache. Caleb's heart thudded hard in his chest. Memories rushed back. The chaos of the night before. The wall of fire racing down the hills. The thunder of hooves as Apache riders drove their horses toward the river. He remembered making a split-second choice, cutting his own fences, shouting for them to use his well, handing over water without asking who they were or what they might want. He hadn't expected anyone to remain. Slowly, he stepped off the porch. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. Unsure whether the word even fit a scene like this, she answered in careful but clear English. "Morning, rancher." Up close, he could see the soot smudged on her cheek, the weariness in her eyes. She was young, but there was nothing fragile about her. Strength seemed to sit in her bones. "My name is Nalinzi," she said. "My people moved on before dawn. I stayed." Caleb swallowed. "Stayed? Why?" For the first time, her expression shifted. Not fear, not softness, but resolve. "Because kindness should not be forgotten," she said quietly. "And because sometimes what comes after the fire matters more than the fire itself." The wind stirred the ash at their feet, and Caleb knew, without understanding how or why, that this morning would change the rest of his life. By midday, the smoke had thinned, leaving the sky washed pale and empty, as if the fire had burned the color right out of it. Caleb worked in silence, resetting a fallen post near the corral, while Nalinzi moved with quiet purpose nearby. She carried water from the well without being asked, her steps light but steady, as though she already knew the rhythms of the land. Every so often, Caleb caught himself watching her, not out of suspicion now, but curiosity that edged into something deeper. When the sun climbed high, he finally set his tools aside and built a small fire from unburned wood behind the cabin. They sat across from each other, the flames low, more for comfort than warmth. For a long moment, neither spoke. The valley was listening. "You helped us," Nalinzi said at last. "Not because you were told to. Not because you wanted payment." Caleb shrugged. "Fire doesn't ask who you are before it takes everything." She studied him, as if weighing the truth of his words. Then she nodded. "Among my people, courage that expects nothing still creates a debt." He frowned. "I didn't save anyone to earn one." "I know." Her voice was calm, certain. "That is why it matters." She told him then of the night, how the fire had trapped her people between the hills and the dry riverbed, how panic had spread when the horses bolted. Caleb listened, remembering the fear in the rider's eyes as clearly as his own. When she explained that she had volunteered to stay behind, his hands stilled. "They didn't send you?" he asked. "No." A faint smile touched her lips. "I chose." She explained that her people believed repayment did not always come in goods or words. Sometimes it came in presence, in shared labor, in standing beside someone when the world tested them. She would remain through the winter, help rebuild what the fire had taken. When the season turned, she would decide whether to return. So would he. Caleb felt the weight of the offer settle over him, heavy, unfamiliar and humbling. "You don't owe me that," he said quietly. I owe the land honesty, she replied. And myself. In the days that followed, her promise became action. She rode the perimeter of the ranch with ease, guiding the cattle back to safer ground. She mended wire with hands that moved swiftly, efficiently. At night, she sat by the fire and spoke little. But when she did, her words carried meaning. The ranch began to change, not just in structure, but in spirit. And though neither of them said it aloud, Caleb felt something growing in the spaces between shared work and shared silence, as steady and undeniable as the land itself. The first sign of trouble came with dust on the horizon. Caleb noticed it while he and Nalinzi were repairing the last stretch of fencing near the south ridge. 3 riders approached at an unhurried pace, their silhouettes sharp against the afternoon light. Caleb's jaw tightened. He recognized them, men from the nearest town, the kind who watched the world as if it owed them explanations. By the time the riders reached the gate, Nalinzi had already straightened, her gaze fixed and unreadable. She did not step behind Caleb, she stepped forward. Well now, one of the men said, eyes lingering too long on her. Didn't expect to find an Apache woman playing house out here? Caleb felt heat rise in his chest. She's a guest on my land. Another man laughed. That's not how folks will see it. Before Caleb could respond, Nalinzi spoke. Her voice was calm, but it cut cleanly through the air. I am not hidden, and I am not owned. I stand where I choose. The men shifted, uncomfortable but unwilling to back down. One rested his hand near his gun. You're asking for trouble, rancher. Harboring her. Caleb stepped beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder. He lowered his rifle, not in surrender but in warning. You'll leave, he said evenly. Now. For a moment the valley held its breath. Then, from the ridge above, movement caught the men's attention. Shapes emerged. Apache scouts, silent and watchful, their presence undeniable. Nalinzi had not mentioned them, but she had never been careless. The riders hesitated. Pride warred with fear, and fear won. With a few muttered curses, they turned their horses and rode away, the dust they kicked up settling slowly behind them. Only when they were gone did Caleb realize how tense his body had been. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. You could have told me they were watching. They would have come even if you stood alone, she said. But it mattered that you did not. That night the sky stretched wide and heavy with stars. The fire between them crackled softly as they sat close, sharing the quiet. Nalinzi removed the blanket from her shoulders and folded it carefully beside Caleb's bedroll. If I stay, she said, her voice low, certain, it is not because of debt. It is because I choose this life. And you! Caleb met her eyes, understanding the weight of what she offered. Then stay, he said, as my wife, not my reward. She nodded once, solemn and sure, and the night seemed to settle around them in approval. Spring arrived softly, almost without notice, carried in on warmer winds and the first green, shoots pushing through the scorched earth. Where ash had once choked the valley, grass returned in stubborn patches, and the ranch stood renewed, not just repaired, but reshaped by shared hands and shared purpose. Caleb woke each morning to the quiet certainty that he was no longer alone, and that knowledge steadied him more than any fence or rifle ever had. Nalinzi moved through the days with the same calm strength she had shown since the first morning. He found her by the trough. She rose before dawn, tending the horses, reading the land as if it spoke directly to her. In the evenings, she sat with Caleb beneath the fading light, teaching him the Apache names for the hills and stars. In return, he showed her letters and words by lantern glow, guiding her hand patiently across the page until the marks began to make sense. When her people returned, they did not come in secrecy. Riders appeared at the edge of the valley in broad daylight, their presence respectful but deliberate. Caleb felt the old tension stir in his chest, but Nalinzi met them with a steady smile. She spoke with her elders for a long time, her voice carrying on the wind, firm yet warm. Caleb waited, knowing this moment was hers. At last, the elders approached him. There were no threats, no demands, only acknowledgement. They saw the rebuilt ranch, the open land, the way Nalinzi stood beside him rather than behind. A quiet blessing was given, not in ceremony, but in understanding. That night there was no grand celebration. Just a fire, a shared meal, and the steady comfort of belonging. Caleb realized then that he had never been given anything. What he had gained was forged through fire, choice, and trust. The valley, once marked by loss, now held a different story. Two lives joined without force or fear, bound by respect rather than obligation. Caleb did not wake to a reward waiting at his side. He woke each day beside a woman who had chosen him freely, just as he had chosen her. And in that choice, the land finally knew peace.